Hi everyone, my name is Rama Carl. I am Professor of Digital Media and Animation at Florida Gulf Coast University. In this video, I'd like to show you how to properly prepare your mesh for reusable rigging in Maya. We want to start with a character that's already been modeled and textured. I'm going to take you through a series of steps. There's quite a lot of them, but if you go through each of them carefully, you're going to end up with a rig that's really nice and able to be used in a lot of contexts. So let's get started. So the first step is to do work in real-world units. We want to work in real-world units because that way we have a character that can work with others in a real context. So we're going to work in real-world units. We do this to start by creating a reference. So we're going to create a cylinder, and then we're going to go to the attribute editor and change the properties of that cylinder. So we want the height to be the height of an average character. I'm going to be working in meters here. You can work in feet if you like. But I'm going to set the height of the cylinder to 1.7 meters. I'm going to set the subdivisions to 8, and then I'm just going to set the radius to 0.1. So this creates a cylinder that is 1.7 meters in height, and I can use that as a reference height for my character. So we can see that by doing that, this character is way too big. And so the first step is to normalize this character. What we want to do is make the transformation an identity. What this means is that we want to have no translation, no rotation, and no scaling. That means that the data is all in the vertex locations. And there's no additional transforms or nothing weird going on with the transform. So what we do is we set the translate to 0, we set the rotations to 0, and then we set the scaling to 1. This is called an identity transform. And we see that he's still too big. What this means is because I've normalized the transformation of my model, that the faces are actually too large, and it's actually better to work with face geometry that's at the correct scale than it is to work with transforms. So the next step is to rescale this mesh. So I'm going to right click and go to vertex. It's faster to work with vertices. So I'm going to select the vertices, and then I'm going to use the scale tool to scale this down. Now it'll be easier if he scales relative to the ground, so I press the D key, and I have this gives me the pivot. I press the D key to get to that, and then I move this down. I'm going to move this to the center, and now I can use the scale tool and scale the vertices down to something which is a reasonable height for this character. So that looks pretty good. That's about the height that I want the character to be, and I'm ready for the next step. Okay, the next step is to put our character into the T-pose. You may be thinking that you can rig this character in the pose that he's in currently. That is, why don't we just put the joints at this angle inside of this mesh? But actually, if we're going to be working with motion capture data, which we're planning to do in the future, then you really need to start with a mesh in the T-pose. A lot of motion capture systems begin in the T-pose, and you need to use that as your reference. So what we need to do is actually take our mesh and make sure that the mesh is in the proper T-pose and not kind of almost a T-pose. We're going to be working with vertices, so I'm going to select vertices. And now I'm going to select the arm using the lasso tool. And I get one side. I'd actually like to do both at the same time, so I'm going to go to the drop down here for symmetry and turn on World X, and that will give me a symmetrical selection. And now you'll see if I just rotate this, some weird things happen. The arms go down and they go kind of like discretely down into the body, and that's not what I want. So I'm going to undo. Even if I use the D key and reposition this so that it's kind of at the place where I want the rotation to happen, now I'm going to do E to rotate. I still get some weird artifacts here because I'm rotating, there's a hard boundary on where I'm rotating. So what we're going to do is what's called soft selection, which is a very kind of fundamental modeling tool in Maya. So to do soft selection, I press the B key, and I should see things turn a little bit yellow. I can hold down the B key and then move my mouse left and right. You should see that the soft selection will change. And the soft selection says that some of these vertices, we want to move them, but not quite so much. It's basically like a soft brush in Photoshop. Now if I do the rotation, we will see that it moves a little bit more naturally. Now there's still some weirdness, and we're going to fix that in just a minute. But let's start by just getting the arms up where they need to be. Now I can move this to get them, you see they're really way too low at this point. So I'm going to move them upward to about where the shoulder should be. So I'm going to focus on fixing the shoulder first. the top of the shoulder before I do under the arm. That looks a little bit better. Remember, you should also be looking down on the model to see if the arms are straight to the side. Press the E key for rotation again, and now I get the arms to the side. Focus on the forearms, the upper arms first, and then do the forearms later. You want to get the upper arms to be in a square T-pose, and they're not quite square yet, so I'm going to keep rotating a little bit more. I can see that the arms are pretty much in the T-pose. Okay, so let's work on the forearm. I'm going to do another soft selection using the lasso tool. I'm going to select the lasso tool. Now I'm going to select this part of the arm, and that's the part that I would like to rotate next. So I'm going to press the E key for rotate again. I'm going to rotate the arm to be along the correct axis. Now I also still need to move it so that it doesn't look weird, and maybe rotate a little bit further. It should be doing this to both sides at the same time. Okay. I'm going to soft select the hand and adjust the hand. Now, an interesting thing about working with a hand is our hands tend to twist. Along the arm, right? They don't twist right at the wrist. The twist actually happens throughout the entire forearm. So what I'm going to do is do this select right at the wrist, but then I'm going to increase the soft selection all the way back to the forearm. When I do a rotation, it rotates properly back at the forearm. I don't really need to rotate too much in this direction, but I do want to rotate up a little bit. And you can see that that does some weirdness early by the elbow, but I can just move this back up to fix that. So you want to kind of find what looks best for your character in a T-pose. This is probably looking pretty good at this point, so I'm just going to kind of stick with that. If I need to, I can hold down B at any time and increase the soft selection and adjust a little bit further. So if I need to bring it in more, maybe just the hand or the wrist is a problem, I can do that. Let's fix the body underneath the armpit now. And here it probably makes more sense to just use the sculpting tools. So I'm going to go back to object mode. Remember to save some intermediate scenes. So I'm just going to call this Old Man 01. And now I'm going to use the sculpting tool to push and pull the part underneath the armpit. So I'm going to work with the hardware texturing turned off by going to shading, hardware texturing. That way I can see the mesh more easily as I'm modeling. I'm going to go to the sculpting tools and select the first kind of push-pull tool. Make sure that your world symmetry is on, and that way you'll be doing both sides at the same time. So with world symmetry on, I'm going to push the vertices of this model inward by holding down Control to push, and that will push the armpit back where it should be on both sides. There's quite a lot of adjustment here, so I'm going to be doing quite a bit of pushing of these. And you can also hold down Shift to smooth if things get kind of crinkled a little bit, and then you can keep pushing things in again if you need to. That's starting to look a little bit better. Still smoothing once in a while. So this is looking a little bit more natural. I can fix the top of the shoulder too if there were any problems there, if things got crinkled. So there we go. Now it's kind of looking a little bit better. Okay, so I've turned hardware texturing back on, and this is what we have currently. Smoothing out can help to smooth out the wrinkles. Holding down Shift to smooth. Okay, it looks pretty good. Now I'm going to work on the legs. I want to really be in a proper T-pose in order for the rig to work well. So that means there shouldn't be any bending at all, and the feet should point straight forward. So I'm going to use the same kind of soft selection in order to fix this. I'm going to go to Vertex. The symmetry will let me select both sides, and here I'm going to select kind of the leg, the right leg and the left will be selected at the same time. You can see those legs are bowed out a tiny bit. I want to rotate that in a bit. I can press the D key again to change the pivot location. Now I'm going to rotate his legs in a tiny bit so that they're really much more straight. If you want him to look like he's hunched over, that really should happen at the animation stage. So we're really focused on this character looking really upright. But notice I also need the legs to rotate back, so be sure you're looking around in both views. So I'm going to reselect use the soft selection lasso tool to reselect the legs. And looking from the side, I'm going to rotate them back. Using the D key to reposition the pivot. Now rotate the legs back, and now the knees need to rotate forward. So Switching to the front again, I'm selecting around the knees and rotating to the side, pressing the E key for rotation, and pressing the D key again to change the pivot so that it pivots at the point of the knee. Now pressing the E key again to rotate to get the feet to sit down flat. And I'm going to also move just slightly forward so that he has a very straight stance. Okay, now the last thing is the feet need to be adjusted a little bit. I'm going to press the lasso tool, select the feet, and now press the D key for pivot, move the pivot back towards the back of the foot. Press the E key to rotate the feet inward, and look at the front and make sure they're very sitting flat. So I'm going to rotate them just a tiny bit so they sit very flat and facing forward, and flat in both directions. So I'm looking at both the front and the side to make sure that the feet are sitting very flat on the ground. So now we have a character in a T-pose, and he looks much more ready to be rigged. So this is what your character should look like when you're ready to rig. Very much in a very strong T-pose, not slouching, the legs are very straight, the feet are pointing forward, and the arms are out to the sides with the palms face down. When you get to this point and you have a mesh ready to go, it's a very good idea to do Edit, Delete All by Type, History. So I can't do undo, redo anymore, but I have a really complete mesh that's just the mesh itself. So now we're ready to start rigging. Let's save our scene as an intermediate number. I'm going to save it as 02. That's it. In the next video, I'll show you how to create a clean FK rig using your prepared mesh.